My neighbor hit my cat going 50 in our residential zone, then laughed at his body and said, should have trained it better, when his luxury car rental business started having mysterious mechanical problems. Every Monday morning, he never suspected the grieving owner who'd studied his every move for 2 weeks. Peter was known in our neighborhood to drive like a maniac, the type of guy who peaked in high school and revved his engines at dawn when the high school junior girls walked by. He's even gone as far as drag racing his equally as smooth-brained buddy right through the middle of a kid's birthday party in their front yard. Peter terrorized our neighborhood with his reckless driving. The first incident occurred when he sideswiped the Thompsons' minivan doing 50 in our residential zone, ripping off their mirror while Mrs. Thompson buckled her toddler inside. Peter fled the scene. When confronted, he claimed their van was illegally parked and called his brother at City Hall. The Thompsons received a code violation the next morning. A month later, Peter T-boned a nursing student while texting and running a red light. Her car flipped. She spent 3 days hospitalized with a concussion and broken ribs. His brother made calls. The traffic footage vanished, and the victim was blamed, losing her insurance. School zones became parent nightmares. Peter would accelerate through crosswalks during pickup, scattering children. The principal pleaded for police presence, but the chief was Peter's golf buddy. Nothing happened. When I asked him to slow down for the children, he sneered, maybe you should move somewhere boring if you can't handle a little noise. Peter had zero respect for anyone's safety, using his connections to escape consequences while endangering lives daily. His brother's influence and the police chief's friendship made him untouchable, turning our street into his personal racetrack. That Saturday morning, I let Mochi out like I had for 12 years. 20 minutes later, Peter's engine died in front of my house. My stomach dropped when I saw Peter standing over Mochi's motionless body. Blood pooled around his orange fur. I ran barefoot across the asphalt and gathered him in my arms. He was still breathing, but each breath came weaker. His green eyes locked on mine like he was saying goodbye. Should have trained it better. Now look what it did to my paint. Peter examined a microscopic mark on his bumper. Mrs. Kim hurried over, tears streaming. She'd seen Peter floor it when Mochi crossed. Peter shrugged at us both. Whoops, I guess. One less cat crapping in everyone's gardens, right? He laughed and drove off. At the emergency vet, I held Mochi as he died slowly from internal bleeding. The police wouldn't help without video evidence. Peter got away with murder again. I stood there holding Mochi's collar, something dark settling in my chest. Not this time. This time, Peter had culled the wrong cat. Over the next 2 weeks, I studied everything about Peter. My research uncovered his luxury car rental business downtown, which consumed his entire life. He constantly bragged about maintaining perfect customer reviews and knew every vehicle personally. The mechanic at the shop beside Peter's lot became my friend. He told me, Peter checks his cars more than I check on my kids. Totally obsessed. Turns out, years ago, Peter had crashed while racing. The accident left permanent nerve damage in his hands, plus paranoid fear about car problems. Every tiny sound or vibration sent him into panic mode. The mechanic shared another useful detail about Peter. He was deeply superstitious and believed mechanical problems spread between cars like contagious diseases. I discovered Peter had a crucial investor meeting coming up to expand his business. I memorized his complete schedule, including his daily test drive routine. That's when my plan crystallized. Monday morning arrived and I scattered bent nails near Peter's driveway entrance. That afternoon, Peter got a flat on the highway and had a complete meltdown. I heard from the mechanic he'd screamed at the tow truck driver for 20 minutes. Tuesday's leak sent him spiraling. By Thursday, he was checking tire pressure every hour and installed security cameras around his house. The thunderstorm gave perfect cover for sugaring his gas tank. When his car started dying, Peter went ballistic at the gas station, demanding they test their fuel while customers stared. His rental fleet mysteriously developed synchronized problems. Batteries died, filters clogged. Nothing catastrophic, but perfectly timed for maximum chaos. Peter accused employees of plotting against him and fired his assistant manager. Customer complaints flooded in as cars broke down during rentals. Peter's voicemails became unhinged rants about saboteurs and jealous competitors. He started following employees home and searching their cars. When metal shavings made his cars sound possessed, Peter completely lost it. He burned sage in the lot and hired a priest to bless the vehicles. His paranoia consumed him completely. He spent days driving between scattered storage locations, checking for hexes. Sleep-deprived and desperate, he started falsifying inspection logs to free up time for his conspiracy investigations. He claimed to service cars while stalking former employees instead. The investor meeting morning brought 3 simultaneous breakdowns. Peter arrived wild-eyed and babbling about curses. Insurance investigators uncovered his fraudulent maintenance records, showing inspections on days he was photographed elsewhere. His license got suspended that afternoon, and that was Peter's breaking point, because according to him, he'd done nothing wrong, and I was just a salty, crazy cat person who deserved to pay. And the next time Peter saw me, he did the unthinkable. I froze when I saw him walking toward me in the parking lot. Peter's eyes held something dangerous, something unhinged that went beyond his usual arrogance. His hands twitched at his sides, those damaged nerves making his fingers dance in ways that looked almost threatening. He cornered me against my car before I could react. The smell of burnt sage still clung to his clothes from his desperate blessing rituals. Dark circles shadowed his bloodshot eyes. 3 days of stubble covered his jaw. This wasn't the cocky street racer anymore. This was someone who'd snapped. Peter reached into his jacket pocket. My heart hammered as he pulled out a thick envelope and shoved it against my chest. I caught it reflexively, feeling the weight of what had to be hundreds of pages inside. He leaned close enough that I could smell the coffee and desperation on his breath. His voice came out low and ragged, nothing like his usual boastful tone. He told me he knew what I'd done. Every nail, every bit of sugar, every perfectly timed mechanical failure. He'd spent the the last 72 hours reviewing security footage from every business within a mile radius of his house and lot. The envelope contained printouts, grainy images of someone who might have been me near his driveway at dawn, a figure that could have been anyone buying sugar at the grocery store, shadows near his rental lot that proved nothing. But Peter had connected every dot in his sleep-deprived mind, building an elaborate conspiracy with me at the center. He grabbed my wrist, his damaged nerves making his grip weak, but his intent clear. He promised I'd pay for ruining his life, for destroying his business, for the curse I'd somehow placed on his cars. Then he did something I never expected. He smiled. Peter explained his new plan with the careful precision of someone who'd thought about nothing else for days. Since the police wouldn't help him, since his connections had dried up after the fraud investigation, he'd handle things himself. He'd already started. My mailbox had developed a mysterious lean that morning. My car tires seemed a bit low. Small things, harmless things, just like I'd done to him. But that was just the beginning. Peter laid out his revenge like a chess master revealing a winning strategy. He'd researched me just like I'd researched him. He knew where I worked, what I drove, who I talked to. He'd already called my workplace with anonymous complaints. He'd already started spreading rumors in the neighborhood about my unstable behavior after losing my cat. The truly terrifying part was how calm he sounded. The manic energy had crystallized into something focused and methodical. He'd learned from what I'd done to him. He understood now how small actions could snowball into life-destroying avalanches, and he planned to bury me under one. Peter released my wrist and stepped back. He told me to enjoy the next few weeks because he'd make sure they were my last good ones. Then he walked away, leaving me holding the envelope full of blurry photos and paranoid theories. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, hands shaking. The hunter had become the hunted. Peter might have lost his business, but he'd gained something worse, purpose, and that purpose was destroying me. The next morning confirmed my fears. My garbage cans had been emptied across my lawn. A dead rat appeared on my doorstep. My car antenna was bent at an odd angle. Petty vandalism that the police would never take seriously, just like they'd never taken Mochi's death seriously. At work, my boss pulled me aside. Someone had called claiming I'd been making threats against a local business owner. The caller had sounded professional, concerned. They'd provided just enough details to seem credible, but not enough to trace. My boss didn't believe it, but she had to document the complaint. Company policy. The psychological warfare had begun. Peter's damaged hands might not let him fight physically, but his mind had sharpened during those sleepless nights of paranoia. He'd studied my tactics and improved on them. Where I'd targeted his cars, he targeted my entire life. My neighbors started avoiding me. Mrs. Kim, who'd cried with me over Mochi, now hurried inside when she saw me coming. The mailman left packages at the end of my driveway instead of bringing them to the door. Someone had been talking to them, planting seeds of doubt, making me seem dangerous. Peter's rental lot sat empty now, his business destroyed, but he'd found a new full-time occupation. Me, Peter's brother at City Hall, and the police chief being his golf buddy. That's quite the convenient setup he's got there, isn't it? Makes me wonder what other connections this guy has that we're not hearing about yet. I spotted him sometimes, sitting in different cars around my neighborhood. Never the same vehicle twice, never close enough to constitute stalking. Always gone before I could document it. The stress began affecting my work. I made mistakes I'd never made before. Forgot meetings, mixed up important details. My boss's concerned looks grew more frequent. The anonymous complaints kept coming, each one just believable enough to require investigation. I tried to gather evidence like Peter had, but he'd learned from his mistakes. No security cameras caught him near my property. No witnesses saw him make the calls. He'd become a ghost, haunting my life without leaving traces. 3 weeks into his campaign, I found my cat's collar cut into pieces in my mailbox. The message was clear. Peter hadn't forgotten why this started. He wanted me to remember Mochi every time something went wrong. He wanted that grief mixed with fear. My coworkers started treating me differently. Conversations stopped when I entered rooms. Lunch invitations dried up. Someone had been spreading stories about my vendetta against a local businessman. How I'd destroyed an innocent man's livelihood over a tragic accident. How I'd become obsessed and dangerous. Peter had flipped the narrative. In his version, he was the victim of a deranged cat owner who'd ruined his life over an unfortunate mishap, and people believed it. Why wouldn't they? I had no proof of his intentional cruelty to Mochi, but everyone could see his business had failed right after my cat died. The isolation was the worst part. Peter had learned that mechanical problems were nothing compared to social destruction. Cars could be fixed, reputations couldn't. He'd taken my successful revenge and turned it into evidence of my instability. I started documenting everything obsessively. Every moved trash can, every anonymous call, every strange look from a neighbor. My notebook filled with paranoid observations that made me look exactly like what Peter was painting me as, someone who'd lost touch with reality. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd driven Peter to paranoid obsession, and now he was returning the favor. We were locked in a spiral of mutual destruction, each of us convinced we were justified, each of us too far gone to stop. But Peter had advantages I didn't. His brother might not help him anymore, but people still remembered when he'd been successful, when he'd been the charming guy with the nice cars who'd made one terrible mistake. They didn't remember Mochi. They didn't remember the other victims. They just saw what Peter wanted them to see. My work performance review came up, and it was brutal. The anonymous complaints had created a pattern. My recent mistakes had built a case. They put me on a performance improvement plan. One more problem, and I'd be gone. Peter must have been watching because that night I found a toy car on my doorstep. Inside was a note. How does it feel? I realized then that Peter had won this round. He'd taken everything I'd done to him and refined it into something worse. Where I'd destroyed his business, he was destroying my entire life. Where I'd made him paranoid about his cars, he'd made me paranoid about everything. But I also realized something else. Peter's revenge revealed his weakness. He needed to to see me suffer. He needed to be there, watching, savoring every moment. That meant he was still close, still vulnerable, still making mistakes. I started planning again. This time, I wouldn't target what Peter owned. I'd target what he'd become. His obsession with destroying me had consumed everything else in his life. He'd fired employees, alienated customers, and burned bridges with everyone who'd ever helped him, all for revenge. That obsession would be his downfall, because while Peter watched me, waiting for his next move, he'd stopped watching himself. He'd stopped protecting what little he had left, and that gave me an opening. The game wasn't over. It had just entered a new phase, one where we both understood the rules, where we both knew what was at stake, where only one of us would walk away intact. Peter thought he'd learned everything from my first campaign against him, but he'd missed the most important lesson. Revenge was a poison that destroyed the person seeking it just as much as the target, and I was about to make sure he learned that lesson the hard way. I decided to turn Peter's obsession against him. If he needed to watch me suffer, I'd give him exactly what he wanted to see, but not in the way he expected. The performance improvement plan at work became my first tool. Instead of fighting it, I embraced it. I started arriving late, looking disheveled. I let my appearance slip. Dark circles under my eyes weren't from lack of sleep anymore. They were carefully applied makeup. I practiced looking haunted in my bathroom mirror until I perfected the 1,000-yard stare of someone breaking down. My coworkers noticed immediately. They whispered when I shuffled past their desks. Some looked concerned. Others seemed satisfied that their suspicions about my instability were confirmed. I made sure to drop my coffee cup during an important meeting, my hands shaking convincingly as I scrambled to clean it up. Peter took the bait. The harassment intensified. My car tires went flat twice in 1 week. Dead animals appeared on my doorstep every few days. My mail started arriving, opened and resealed. He was getting bolder, more confident that he was winning. I let him see me checking over my shoulder constantly. I jumped at sudden noises. During lunch breaks, I sat alone in my car, making sure to park where Peter could watch from whatever vehicle he was using that day. Sometimes I'd put my head on the steering wheel and shake my shoulders like I was crying. My sister called, concerned about the rumors she'd heard. I told her everything was fine, but made my voice crack just enough to worry her. She showed up at my house that weekend with groceries and cleaning supplies, convinced I was falling apart. I let her see the notebook where I'd been documenting Peter's harassment, pages filled with increasingly erratic handwriting. She insisted on staying the night. Perfect. Peter needed to see that even my family thought I was losing it. I made sure to have a loud breakdown where she had to comfort me, knowing Peter was probably watching from somewhere nearby. The next phase required more commitment. I started visiting a therapist, making sure to schedule appointments at times when Peter could follow me. I'd emerge from the sessions looking drained, sometimes sitting in my car for 20 minutes afterward with my head in my hands. At work, I submitted a request for mental health leave. My boss approved it immediately, relief evident on her face. The whole office probably celebrated getting rid of the unstable employee who'd been making everyone uncomfortable. Peter's confidence grew with each passing day. The harassment became almost predictable. Monday mornings brought vandalized property. Wednesdays meant anonymous calls to various aspects of my life. Fridays always included something related to Mochi, a twisted reminder of how this all started. I started leaving my curtains open at night, giving Peter a clear view of my deteriorating life. I'd pace around my living room, pulling at my hair. Sometimes I'd throw things, nothing valuable, but the gesture looked dramatic from outside. I'd collapse on the couch afterward, the picture of defeat. My neighbors completely avoided me now. Even Mrs. Kim crossed the street when she saw me coming. The isolation Peter had orchestrated was complete, or so he thought. Because while Peter watched me crumble, he didn't notice what else was happening. He didn't see me installing hidden cameras around my property during my late-night pacing sessions. He didn't realize that my erratic behavior at work included backing up every anonymous complaint call recording onto multiple drives. He didn't know that my therapist was actually my cousin, a law student who was helping me document everything properly. Most importantly, Peter didn't notice that his own life was withering away while he focused on mine. His rental lot remained closed. His few remaining friends had stopped calling after he'd blown them off repeatedly to stalk me. His brother at City Hall had finally had enough of Peter's drama and cut contact completely. Peter had become exactly what he'd tried to make me: isolated, obsessed, and paranoid. But unlike me, he didn't have a plan. He just had hatred. 6 weeks into my performance, I decided to escalate. I started leaving my house at odd hours, driving aimlessly around town. Peter followed every time, burning gas and time he couldn't afford. I'd stop at random locations, sit for a while, then drive somewhere else. Sometimes I'd park near his old rental lot and just stare at the empty building. He must have thought I was planning something against his business. He started sleeping in his car outside the lot, guarding nothing but empty space and bad memories. His appearance deteriorated rapidly. The stubble became a patchy beard. His clothes went unwashed. The nice cars he'd been rotating through started showing wear from constant use. I began the final phase of my plan on a Thursday morning. I called in sick to work, which wasn't hard since I was officially on mental health leave anyway. Then I drove to the grocery store, making sure Peter saw me. But instead of my usual defeated shuffle, I walked with purpose. I bought sugar, lots of it, along with various automotive fluids. Peter's reaction was immediate. He abandoned all pretense of subtlety, following me closely as I drove to his old rental lot. I parked across the street and just sat there, the supplies visible in my back seat. Peter parked behind me, probably calling his brother or the police. But what could he report? That someone was sitting in their car with legal purchases? Peter's playing chess while our narrator's been setting up dominoes this whole time. Sugar in the back seat is basically the world's most obvious trap, and he's racing right into it like a moth to a flame that burns gas money. I waited an hour, then drove away. Peter stayed at the lot, convinced I'd returned to sabotage something. He spent the entire night there, guarding his empty business from an attack that never came. The next day, I repeated the performance, but at a different location, his house. I parked down the street with the same supplies visible, just watching. Peter raced home and spent hours checking his vehicles, looking for damage that didn't exist. This pattern continued for a week. I'd show up somewhere connected to Peter with suspicious but legal items, wait, then leave. He'd spend hours afterwards searching for sabotage, protecting things I had no intention of touching. His paranoia reached new heights. He installed more cameras, hired security for his empty lot, and started carrying a baseball bat in his car. The beauty was that I never did anything illegal. I just existed in public spaces with common household items. Peter's own mind did the rest, conjuring threats from shadows and innocent actions. His remaining money drained away on security measures for property that no longer generated income. He stopped eating regular meals, surviving on gas station coffee and whatever he could grab while maintaining his vigilance. The cars he'd been using started breaking down from overuse and lack of maintenance. The irony wasn't lost on me. I documented everything meticulously. Every time Peter followed me, I had it on camera. Every threatening gesture, every instance of stalking, all captured and stored safely. My cousin helped me organize it all into a comprehensive file that painted a clear picture. A man who'd lost everything and blamed an innocent neighbor for his own failures. Peter's brother finally intervened after getting multiple calls from concerned citizens about Peter's erratic behavior. He tried talking sense into Peter, but their confrontation in the parking lot of Peter's empty business turned into a screaming match that several witnesses recorded on their phones. The police chief, Peter's golf buddy, couldn't ignore the situation anymore when Peter was caught sleeping in his car outside my workplace, the baseball bat visible on his passenger seat. They had a long conversation that ended with Peter being escorted away, though no charges were filed. Professional courtesy only extended so far. My performance reached its crescendo when I returned to work after my mental health leave. I looked refreshed, stable, like someone who'd gotten the help they needed. My co-workers welcomed me back cautiously, but I was professional, competent, and completely normal. The contrast with my previous behavior was stark and convincing. Meanwhile, Peter continued his descent. Without me to watch, he turned his paranoid attention to others. He accused neighbors of conspiring against him. He confronted strangers who parked too long near his house. He called his brother repeatedly with wild theories about coordinated attacks on his life. The final straw came when Peter tried to break into my house while I was at work. He was convinced I had evidence of my crimes hidden inside. What he didn't know was that I'd installed a state-of-the-art security system during my mental health leave. The cameras captured everything in crystal clarity. Peter shattering my window, climbing inside, ransacking my home looking for evidence that didn't exist. I came home to find police cars surrounding my house. Peter was in handcuffs, ranting about sugar and metal shavings and curses. The officers looked exhausted. One of them, Officer Martinez, took my statement while Peter screamed accusations from the back of the patrol car. I played my role perfectly, the concerned neighbor who'd tried to help someone clearly struggling with mental health issues. I showed Officer Martinez the documentation my cousin had helped me prepare. Months of harassment, stalking, and escalating threats, all meticulously recorded. I even had the therapy session records, though those were carefully edited to remove any mention of my planning. Peter's brother arrived as they were taking Peter away. He looked older, worn down by months of trying to manage his brother's decline. He apologized to me, explaining that Peter had never been the same after losing his business, how the stress had broken something inside him, how he'd become convinced that someone was out to get him. I accepted his apology graciously, even offered to drop the charges if Peter got help. But the breaking and entering was beyond anyone's ability to sweep under the rug. Peter had finally crossed a line that his connections couldn't uncross. The neighborhood slowly warmed back up to me after Peter's arrest. Mrs. Kim brought me cookies and apologized for avoiding me, explaining that Peter had told her terrible things about me. Other neighbors shared similar stories. Peter had poisoned the entire community against me, but now they saw the truth. He was the unstable one. My workplace welcomed me back fully after the news spread about Peter's arrest. The anonymous complaints stopped, obviously, and my performance improved dramatically without the constant stress of harassment. My boss even apologized for not taking my concerns more seriously earlier. Peter's rental lot went up for sale within a month. His brother handled the transaction, trying to salvage something from the wreckage of Peter's life. The building sold for far less than it was worth, but at least it covered some of Peter's mounting legal fees. I drove past the lot the day the new owners took possession. They were a young couple planning to open a pet grooming business. The irony was so perfect, it almost made me smile. Almost. Because despite everything, I still missed Mochi. His death had started all of this, and nothing could bring him back. Peter spent 90 days in county jail for the breaking and entering. His lawyer, paid for by his exhausted brother, managed to plea it down from a felony to a misdemeanor. The judge ordered mandatory psychiatric evaluation and anger management classes as part of his probation. I heard through the neighborhood gossip that Peter moved in with his brother after his release. He couldn't afford his own place anymore, and his brother felt obligated to help despite everything. The conditions were strict: therapy, medication, and absolutely no contact with me or anyone from the old neighborhood. For a while, I kept expecting to see Peter around every corner. I'd catch myself checking my rearview mirror more than necessary, looking for cars that might be following me, but he never appeared. His brother kept him on a tight leash, driving him to appointments and monitoring his activities. The pet grooming business opened 3 months after Peter's arrest. I brought them a welcome basket and wished them luck. They seemed nice, completely unaware of the history of their building. I didn't enlighten them. Some stories were better left buried. My life returned to normal, or as normal as it could be. be after everything that had happened. I adopted another cat, a black rescue named Shadow, who liked to sleep in the same sunny spot Mochi had loved. He wasn't a replacement, just a new beginning. Sometimes I'd think about Peter, wonder if he ever figured out the truth. Did he realize, sitting in his brother's spare room, that I'd orchestrated his final breakdown? That I'd played him as carefully as he'd tried to play me? Or did he still believe he was the victim of random misfortune and his own paranoid delusions? It didn't matter. Peter had called Mochi out of spite and arrogance, then tried to destroy my life when I fought back. He'd learned that actions have consequences, even if those consequences came from unexpected directions. His connections couldn't save him from himself. The neighborhood felt safer without Peter racing through it. Parents let their children play outside without fear. The Thompsons fixed their minivan and painted it a cheerful blue. The nursing student Peter had hit graduated and got a job at the local hospital. Life moved on, but I kept the security cameras, and I kept all the documentation, stored safely in multiple locations, because Peter's probation wouldn't last forever, and people like him didn't change easily. His brother's control would eventually loosen. His anger would need somewhere to go. If Peter ever decided to come back, I'd be ready, but this time, I wouldn't need to plan anything elaborate. The law was watching him now. One violation of his probation, one instance of contact with me, and he'd face real consequences. The system that had protected him for so long now had him in its sights. Justice came in many forms. Sometimes it was immediate and obvious. Sometimes it was slow and subtle. And sometimes it required helping someone destroy themselves with their own hatred. Peter had chosen his path the moment he laughed at Mochi's broken body. Everything that followed was just the inevitable conclusion of that choice. I still visited Mochi's grave every week, leaving fresh flowers and telling him about my day. Shadow would come sometimes, sitting quietly beside me like he understood. Maybe he did. Cats were perceptive creatures. The last time I saw Peter was at the grocery store 6 months after his arrest. He was with his brother, looking smaller somehow, diminished. His hands shook slightly as he reached for items, the nerve damage more pronounced now. He saw me across the produce section and froze. For a moment, we just stared at each other. I saw recognition in his eyes, maybe even understanding. Then his brother noticed and quickly steered him away, whispering urgently. Peter didn't resist, didn't try to confront me. He just let himself be led away like a broken man who'd learned his limits. I finished my shopping in peace, adding an extra can of cat food to my cart for Shadow. Outside, Peter's brother was loading groceries while Peter sat in the passenger seat, staring at nothing. They drove away slowly, carefully, following every traffic law. Something feels off about how perfectly everything lined up here. Peter breaking into the house just when there's a fancy security system ready to catch him. I wonder if our narrator knew exactly what buttons to push to make Peter snap at just the right moment. The sun was setting as I drove home, painting the sky in shades of orange that reminded me of Mochi's fur. I thought about karma, justice, and the price of cruelty. Peter had paid his price, was still paying it every day in his diminished life, but the ledger wasn't quite balanced, not yet, because Peter's story wasn't over, just paused, and people like Peter, consumed by pride and rage, rarely stayed down forever. His brother's vigilance would eventually waver, the probation would end, the memories would fade for everyone except Peter and me. So I waited and watched, living my life, but staying alert, because the game between us had entered a new phase, one where the rules were clearer, but the stakes remained high. Peter had learned not to underestimate me. I'd learned that victory required constant vigilance. The restraining order arrived 2 weeks after the grocery store encounter. Peter's brother had filed it on his behalf, claiming I'd been stalking and harassing Peter during his recovery. The irony burned, but I signed the acknowledgement without protest. Let them think they'd won this round. My cousin reviewed the document that evening, pointing out several overreaches in the language. The order extended beyond reasonable boundaries, attempting to restrict my movements in public spaces we both frequented. She started drafting a response while I organized my evidence files, preparing for whatever came next. Peter's brother showed up at my workplace the following Monday. Security intercepted him at the reception desk, but not before several co-workers witnessed his agitated state. He'd brought a folder of documents, waving them around while demanding to speak with my supervisor about my dangerous obsession with his brother. The security footage captured everything: his wild gestures, his raised voice, the way he slammed his fist on the counter when denied entry. My boss watched the recording with me later, shaking her head at the obvious intimidation attempt. She documented the incident in my personnel file as harassment, strengthening my position. That night, I found my garbage cans moved again, their contents scattered with surgical precision. Only items related to Mochi were disturbed: his food cans, toy packaging, anything that connected to my loss. The message was clear. Peter might be living under restrictions, but his brother had taken up the torch. I installed additional cameras, covering every blind spot around my property. The footage revealed Peter's brother making regular drive-bys, sometimes pausing to take photos of my house. He always stayed just within legal boundaries, never quite crossing into actionable harassment. My neighbors began reporting strange encounters. Mrs. and Kim found someone had been leaving dead mice on her doorstep after she'd resumed talking to me. The Thompsons discovered their newly painted minivan had been keyed, though no one could prove who'd done it. The pattern was familiar, but the execution was sloppier than Peter's work. I documented everything meticulously, building a harassment case that mirrored what I'd done with Peter. But his brother was smarter in some ways, always maintaining plausible deniability. He never left clear evidence, never made direct threats, just created an atmosphere of unease. The pet grooming business next to Peter's old lot started experiencing problems. Their delivery trucks got mysterious flats. Customers received anonymous calls warning them about dangerous animals at the facility. The young couple running it looked increasingly stressed, though they couldn't understand why they'd been targeted. I recognized Peter's influence in the tactics, even if his brother was the the one executing them. The obsession with vehicles, the anonymous calls, the gradual escalation, it all followed Peter's playbook. But where Peter had been driven by personal rage, his brother seemed motivated by misguided loyalty. My work performance remained stellar despite the distractions. I'd learned from the first round how to compartmentalize, keeping my professional life separate from the ongoing conflict. My boss even recommended me for a promotion, noting my resilience under pressure. Peter's probation officer contacted me unexpectedly, asking about any violations or contact attempts. I told her about the restraining order and showed her my documentation of the brothers' activities. She took notes carefully, her expression growing more concerned with each incident I described. The next week, Peter's brother's harassment intensified. He started showing up at places I frequented, the grocery store, the gym, the coffee shop, always maintaining legal distance, always just happening to be there when I arrived. The psychological pressure was mounting, but I refused to change my routines. I began varying my schedule slightly, just enough to throw off his patterns. Sometimes I'd arrive somewhere early and wait in my car, watching him pull up at my usual time and look confused. Other times I'd skip my regular stops entirely, knowing he'd waste hours waiting for me. The game of cat and mouse continued for weeks. Peter's brother grew increasingly frustrated as his tactics failed to provoke the reaction he wanted. I maintained my calm exterior, going about my life as if his presence meant nothing. Inside, I was documenting every encounter, every incident, building an airtight case. One evening, I caught him on camera attempting to access my backyard. He'd waited until dark, creeping along the fence line with something in his hand. The motion sensors triggered the floodlights, and he fled, dropping what turned out to be another pile of Mochi's torn collar pieces. He must have saved them from Peter's original harassment campaign. I filed a police report the next morning, providing the clear video evidence. Officer Martinez remembered me from Peter's arrest and took my complaint seriously. He warned me that Peter's brother was escalating and suggested I consider additional security measures. The warning proved prescient. 3 nights later, my security system alerted me to movement in my driveway. Peter himself stood there, swaying slightly, clearly intoxicated. His brother sat in a running car at the curb, watching. Peter stared at my house for several long minutes, his damaged hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. I called 911 immediately, reporting a probation violation in progress. I stayed inside, watching through the cameras as Peter began walking toward my front door. His brother honked the horn urgently, trying to call him back, but Peter ignored him. The police arrived just as Peter reached my porch. He turned at the sound of sirens, his face cycling through confusion, rage, and finally resignation. The officers recognized him immediately, one of them shaking his head as they approached. Peter didn't resist as they cuffed him, though his brother erupted from the car, shouting about entrapment and harassment. Officer Martinez arrived as backup, reviewing my security footage on scene. The evidence was indisputable. Peter had violated both his probation and the restraining order. His brother's involvement was also clear, though proving criminal conspiracy would be harder. They took both brothers into custody that night. The next morning brought a flurry of legal activity. Peter's probation was revoked, sending him back to jail to serve his full sentence. His brother faced charges for aiding a probation violation and criminal harassment. My cousin helped me file for an expanded restraining order covering both brothers. The neighborhood reacted with relief and vindication. Neighbors who'd been experiencing harassment came forward with their own reports. The pet grooming business owners revealed they'd been recording suspicious activity around their shop. The community that Peter had once terrorized was finally fighting back. Peter's and his brother's assets were frozen pending the legal proceedings. The family's remaining connections in city government distanced themselves, not wanting to be associated with the scandal. The empire of intimidation Peter had built was crumbling completely. I attended every court hearing, sitting quietly in the gallery as the evidence mounted. Peter looked smaller each time I saw him, his paranoia now mixed with the reality of consequences he couldn't escape. His brother's misguided loyalty had only made things worse, adding years to Peter's sentence and earning his own legal troubles. The prosecutor built a strong case, showing a pattern of harassment and intimidation spanning years. My documentation proved invaluable, as did the testimony of other victims who finally felt safe coming forward. The Thompsons testified about their vandalized van. The nursing student Peter had hit described her ongoing medical issues. Peter's brother tried to paint me as the instigator, but his claims fell apart under scrutiny. The timeline clearly showed Peter's escalating behavior starting with Mochi's death. My responses, while calculated, had all been legal. Their actions, documented in detail, were not. The judge showed no leniency. Peter received the maximum sentence for his violations, plus additional time for the conspiracy with his brother. His brother got 2 years for criminal harassment and aiding a probationer. Both were ordered to have no contact with me or any other victims after release. The courtroom was silent as the sentences were read. Peter's shoulders slumped in final defeat. His brother looked stunned, apparently having believed his family connections would still protect him. But those days were over. The system that had shielded them for so long was now their prison. After the sentencing, I stood in the courthouse parking lot, breathing in the crisp air. Other victims approached me, thanking me for standing up to Peter. The Thompsons hugged me. The nursing student shook my hand with tears in her eyes. We'd all suffered under Peter's reign of terror, but together, we'd ended it. The pet grooming business thrived once the harassment stopped. They named their shop Mochi's Place after hearing the full story, a tribute that touched me deeply. The young couple insisted I bring Shadow for free grooming whenever I wanted. The building that had housed Peter's corrupt business now served a purpose that honored my cat's memory. I returned home that evening to find Shadow waiting in his favorite sunny spot. The house felt peaceful for the first time in over a year. No more checking cameras obsessively, no more documenting harassment, no more planning countermoves in an endless game of revenge. The next few months passed quietly. I focused on work, earning that promotion my boss had recommended. Shadow and I settled into comfortable routines. The neighborhood kids played freely in the streets again. Mrs. Kim and I resumed our morning conversations over the fence. Life returned to normal, or better than normal. I still kept the security cameras active and the documentation safely stored. Peter would serve at least 3 more years, his brother too, but I'd learned not to underestimate their capacity for grudges. When they were released, I'd be ready if needed, but I wouldn't spend my life waiting for that day. Sometimes I'd drive past the old locations, Peter's former house, now for sale, the spot where Mochi died, now marked by a small memorial neighbors had placed there. The anger had faded, replaced by a sense of completion. Justice had been served, not through revenge, but through patience and careful documentation. On the anniversary of Mochi's death, I visited his grave with Shadow. Fresh flowers covered the small plot, gifts from neighbors who remembered. Mrs. Kim had left a note for the cat who changed our neighborhood. The Thompsons had planted catnip. Even the nursing student had stopped by. I sat there for a while, telling Mochi how his death had ultimately made our community safer, how Peter's cruelty had been his own undoing, how the connections that had protected him became the chains that bound him. Shadow rubbed against my leg, purring softly. The sun set as we headed home, painting the sky in familiar orange hues. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, a life free from Peter's shadow. I'd won not through elaborate schemes, but through truth, patience, and the support of a community that had finally found its voice. Justice had taken time, but it had arrived, and that was enough. Alright, if you've made it all the way here, you're a real one. Seriously, thanks for hanging out through all my overthinking and rambling. It means a lot.